Racist park, let's go! This was an actual sign near the Chinese Ethnic Culture Park in Beijing, and it was taken down in late 2007 for, obvious reasons. But what if I told you that this was an actual correct translation, that this park was in fact super duper racist? See, in English, when we want to show that something or someone is associated with something else, we add what we call an ist suffix at the end of it. For example, the word cyclist is associated with the word cycle. The word novelist is associated with the word novel. The word manzhou in Chinese Cantonese and minzu in Chinese Mandarin has multiple meanings, including nationality, ethnicity, and race. And see, this park was created to celebrate Chinese cultural heritage and the diversity of Chinese ethnic groups, meaning it's associated with ethnicity. So for a park that's all about the ethnic and racial heritage of China, technically, racist park would in fact not be an inaccurate translation. Now obviously this doesn't work in English at all because racist has a wildly different meaning in English. So what in theory is a perfectly accurate translation turns out to be completely ridiculous and offensive. Guys, I promise you, if you go to that park, you will not get hated on if you're not Chinese, okay? And this right here is the weakness of machine translators like Google Translate. How many times have we tried using its camera function to translate something only to get something completely unintelligible? And why is Chinese in particular so much harder for Google Translate? Well, first off, there's no argument. Chinese is one of the most complex languages in the world. Look at these characters, for Pete's sake. From the super complicated characters to the countless dialects, it makes learning Chinese a super challenge, especially coming from alphabetic groups like English. But what exactly makes Chinese so difficult to translate using technology? It's a machine, get it right? There are actually 4 main reasons for this, all right? 1, we all know that Chinese grammar is different from English. For example, I'm gonna subscribe to this channel today. In Chinese grammar is, I today subscribe to this channel. But really, to what extent is the difference? The 2 main ones that Google Translate struggles with, in particular, are tense and ambiguity. In Chinese, there actually isn't a distinction between present, past, and future tenses. Instead, in place of grammatical markers for tenses, Chinese prefers markers of aspect, a grammatical feature that indicates the flow of events. We can see it in words like le in Mandarin and zhao in Cantonese. For example, 我食咗飯, or in Mandarin, 我吃了饭. There's no real actual past tense here technically, it just indicates that I have eaten, right? It's different. Without going into a crazy grammar lesson, that's why when you see Chinese immigrants speak English, they often screw up tenses because tenses don't exist in the same way in Chinese as they do in English. So this tense confusion combined with the Chinese habit of omitting pronouns, which is quite common, right? 食咗飯未啊? 吃飯了嗎? Or we don't say, did you eat yet? We just say, eat yet. And so having both the missing pronouns and the weird tense aspect makes it really confusing for machines. Another challenge for machines is ambiguity. The word da in Mandarin or ge in Cantonese is multi-purpose. It can be used to represent ownership, like 我的 or 我的, or relation, like in 見到嘅人 or 看到的人 in Mandarin, those who saw. Now, it might be easy for a machine to translate something when it has all the context, like 這是我的家, 呢個係我嘅屋企. But something that's a bit more ambiguous, like 我媽媽家 or 我媽媽屋企, is a bit harder for it to figure out. So grammar is one of the biggest challenges for machines, but number 2 is actually Chinese is a language that relies heavily on context, partially because Chinese relies on words that can have different meanings based on the situation. And anyone who's learned Chinese knows that this is what makes Chinese hell on earth. Think about how in English you could refer to multiple things as, for example, the word bar, right? You could be referring to like a counter as a bar. You could be referring to, an establishment as a bar, bar with the bros, right? Or even an exercise equipment, like an exercise bar, could be a bar as well, depending on the context. Now, same thing with the word, picture. For example, you could refer to a literal picture, the noun of a picture. You could also be referring to as a verb, for instance, picture this, right? Imagine. Now, that's just 2 in English. That's not the case for a lot of words in English, but this is the case for almost every single freaking Chinese character, and this is what makes Chinese absolutely brutal. One example of this is the character xing or heng in Cantonese. In some contexts, it can mean go or walk. For example, the word 行人 or 行人, which means pedestrian. In other contexts though, it on its own can mean a million things. Like, for example, when we want to say okay or approval in situations, we can say 行. In other situations, the character can actually have a different pronunciation altogether. For example, that character can also be pronounced hang in Mandarin or hong in Cantonese, which means either a lot of other things like line or row. I mean, typing that character into Google Translate gives you this. What the hell, Chinese? All right, so now take that one example of a character and apply it to countless other words. So for example, if you look at the word bank, 銀行, or 銀行 in Mandarin, it's not pronounced 銀行 in Cantonese or 銀行 in Mandarin. It's pronounced completely different. Those two characters together make up the word bank. But how is Google supposed to know if we're trying to use those words as individual characters? Because 銀 or 銀 means money. Like, what if I want to say money walks? So Google has a hard time figuring out which meaning you want to use in this case, and apply that now to countless other words, all with translations that are contextual in nature. It's easy to see where a machine, I mean, even for humans, it's easy to see where a machine like Google Translate might go wrong with this. And that's why when you use Google Translate, when you travel to China, it's kind of hard. Number 3. Now you might have heard of the term Chongu in Chinese, which is a 4-character Chinese idiom that exists for practically every single situation possible. An idiom is basically like, I'm on cloud 9. But there's a million in Chinese used actively. Like, not many people say I'm on cloud 9, but a lot of people say 不可思议 or 不可思议, which means how unbelievable something is. Or maybe cussing out your coworker because he's always 半途而废, 半途而廢, which means always giving up halfway. And some of these Chengyus might be self-explanatory. Like, for example, 前所未有 or 前所没有, where 前所 means before and 未有 means doesn't have. The full Chengyu naturally meaning like naturally unprecedented or, never seen before. But some are a little bit harder to figure out. And when I say a little bit, I mean freaking hard. Say we were to put the Chengyu 笑里藏刀 or 笑里藏刀 into Google Translate. This is what we would get. Incredibly helpful, as you can see. What the hell does smiling face hiding dagger mean? Can someone tell me what that means? This phrase is actually rooted in Chinese history and came during the Tang Dynasty in the 7th century. And it's similar to in English how we say a wolf in sheep's clothing. Basically just someone who is basically really nice on the surface, really kind, but secretly is trying to screw you over. I can think of a lot of people like that. So Chengyu come from a multitude of sources, from ancient poetry, like we just saw, to, history, parables, and stories. And so some are a little more complex, like we just saw, than others. And even then, context still plays a big role in how we use a Chengyu. And you can easily make a situation awkward by using one that's unsuitable. Like, imagine everyone's at a funeral and someone says, "Ooh, I'm on cloud 9." Pretty weird, right? So that's the third problem. Now the fourth problem is, see, localization is the process of translating from one language to another in a way that adheres to the target region's cultural and linguistic norms. For example, in North America, it's normal to say, I'm down for doing something, like I'm down for an event. That doesn't really make sense. I'm down technically means I want to do it. But if you translate that to Chinese, for instance, in reverse, you might get I'm sad, not I want to do it, right? And so that's what it means. Localization means translating the language to what makes sense in that specific region, in that specific context. And so this often means changing the translation to get the same meaning across instead of directly translating the desired sentence or phrase. For example, let's look at the phrase, how was your day? That could literally translate to how was your day, how was the literal day? 你的天怎么样? How was the literal day? How was the sky today? And you probably get some funny looks if you ever said that. So putting that into Google Translate gives us 你今天过得怎么样? Which literally means, how's your day going today? Now, it's not a one-to-one translation naturally, but it's pretty good because Google knows these kind of common phrases. But let's try putting something a bit more complex. For example, in Mandarin, 忠言逆耳, or in Cantonese, 忠言逆耳, which directly translates to honest advice is unpleasant to the ear, which sounds pretty weird to us English speakers. What does that even mean? Because they literally just translated that word for word. A more localized translation would be something like, truth hurts. No one would ever say honest advice is unpleasant to the ear. But really what we want to say is, truth hurts. And this is why localization is so important. It's taking the meaning or purpose of the phrase and thinking, how can we make this sound natural in another language?
Tell us what was going on, man. We were totally blindsided by this.
And it's why the best translations are never the ones that are one-to-one with the original text, but the ones that tweak it to make it match the target place's cultural norms. So Chinese is complex, but what exactly is the limitation when it comes to Google Translate and other translation services? Like, can't we just get native speakers to look at the translations? Well, Google Translate operates using a machine learning model, meaning that it learns based on what information it can access. That means that things that are provided in bulk, like incredibly common phrases and words, will be picked up a lot quicker than ones that are a bit more complex and contextually dependent. So you'd probably get a better translation for something simple like, what's the weather? Compared to if you were to put in the entirety of your grade 9 English essay into Google Translate. The context just isn't there. On top of that, what we expect as users in terms of a perfect translation usually isn't one that's 100% accurate to the original text, but one that simply makes sense in the context that we're speaking in. And Google Translate as a machine just doesn't know everything that goes on inside our heads. And that's why it's more beneficial when you're traveling to learn the language rather than to rely on machines, because you don't actually get the meaning out of it. What if these limitations were removed? What if Google Translate could give us perfect translations for anything we input into it? As AI technology and neural machine translation continues to improve alongside the increasing amount of data that's becoming available, Google Translate is likely to get better at understanding the nuances of Chinese. More data obviously means more information and examples to learn from. It means better predictions. It means more accurate translations for a greater amount of situations. Who knows? Perhaps in the future we'll see the day that Google translates everything and finally masters Chinese. But there's one final thing that AI will never be able to replace, and that's authentic human interaction. Sure, it might be accurate, but it still has to go through a machine, right? You're never gonna get the emotions conveyed, all those little expressions that only come with understanding the language using machine. That's why it's so beautiful to learn Chinese, to learn another language, because you get to open up a whole new world of culture. If you love learning about Chinese language in this video, then you'll love this video on why Korean and Japanese people stole Chinese language. And otherwise, click here to watch a video that you think you'll love.